Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your tea break and you managed to warm up a little bit. Really excited to be presenting this next panel, which is called Charting a New Economy. And I've been here all day listening to all of the conversations that have been taking place, and we've touched on so many different topics from ESG to supply chain disruptions to the challenge of keeping global dialogue going to cyber attacks, the most recent panel, which I thought was really interesting as well. So now we're going to talk about what does this actually mean for the economy? What is the definition of this new economy that we're working towards? So let me introduce our panelists today. Sitting on my left is Laurel Broughton, the CEO of Invest in Canada. That is an organization that promotes and attracts FDI, that's foreign direct investment, into Canada. On her left, we have Judy Marks, who I spoke to earlier, the president and CEO of Otis, that is the world's leading company for elevator and escalator manufacturing, installation, and service, moving 2 billion people a day. 2 billion people a day. That's a big number. On her left is Soren Toft, the CEO of MSC, that is the Mediterranean Shipping Company. It is the second largest shipping company in the world. What was that? And largest. Okay, second largest. The biggest, you're saying. Correction. Largest shipping company in the world. I stand corrected. And then on his left is Thomas Gangel, the CEO of Borealis, one of the world's leading providers of plastic solutions and materials like polyethylene and polypropylene. And that is the extent of my chemistry knowledge. All right, so let's just start with the state of the world economy today, because the panel, obviously, we've got another 50 minutes to talk about what we're striving towards. But how about we just start with how things stand today? Laurel, I'd like to start with you.
Well, I guess I'm in a very privileged role. This is 11 weeks into this new responsibility as CEO of Invest in Canada. And I get to sell Canada every day to the world. And so in Canada, there is absolutely a sense of optimism, thinking back to your panel earlier today. And I think it's because we have all the building blocks that we feel we need to be able to build that future. And I think we've been on that discussion for a while. So we have strong talent. We have a diverse population. We've embraced the challenge that is climate change for a number of years. And now we're building out all of the facets that you need to build that next economy. And I think we are a good friend and partner in the world. So I think that also is a key part of what's happening right now. You need to think about who you're working with and that partnership as well. And I would say we are very interconnected to the world. So we have free trade agreements with 1.5 billion consumers across the world from end to end. And I think that is reflective of the fact that Canada is a small nation, but it's been a bridge building nation for many years. So I think we feel really positive about it and look forward to being able to talk a bit more concretely about that future. There's no doubt that we had, as everyone did, challenges during COVID-19 pandemic. That being said, I think you saw governments, which I have been privileged to be part of in various capacities over many years, move quickly and at the speed of business and responding to people. And that was really important to keep building that confidence.
Judy, looking at it from the lens of running a big business, do you feel like we are now in a new paradigm as far as how people are thinking about businesses and what businesses can offer to broader society? Remember, in the 80s, the mantra was Milton Friedman, maximizing profits. You fast forward to today, which is actually almost 40 years ago now. Crazy to think that. And it feels like people want to see more out of businesses. They want to see them offering more to their communities and to broader stakeholders, that the fiduciary responsibility goes beyond just maximizing profits.
Yeah, so it's great to be with everyone, and I have the privilege to lead the leading elevator and escalator company in the globe, who's been around for 169 years and is continuously reinventing ourselves to be able to move the world and keep the world moving, whether that's through COVID and you had to move in your residences or in the new economy, which we're very excited about because we believe it is a digital connected economy that still has physical movement. So I think then, and I was around in the 80s, I was actually in industry in the 80s. And I think what we're seeing, and just so you get a sense of Otis, Think of us in almost over 200 countries and territories, and almost every town and city you live in. Anywhere where there's a building 3 to 4 stories and above, we're there. And on any given day, we're installing somewhere in the world 10,000 units and at 10,000 installation sites and providing 200,000 service calls. So we get a good sense of community because we're local, and we're local for local. So we live with you, and we're part of the communities and where we live. You know, there are lots of different nomenclatures now. People say ESG, but for us, it's all about living your purpose and your values. And if you do that and you do good, you'll also do well. And for us, that's all about returning to our communities. It's about being role models where we are, but it's also about providing a service and keeping the world moving. And, you know, we like to say, you know, we have a responsibility to serve the generations that have gone before us, as well as sponsor the generations that come after us and perform for the generations today. And performance is about business performance, and it's about making a difference where you live and work. And when you can blend those two, we call that strategy. And that strategy has a social element to it, but it also has a return element to it.
Well, we'll talk more about that in the rest of the panel. Soren, I'd like to turn to you. I feel like you're in a unique position to talk about the state of the global economy, given that you do run a shipping business. And so much has happened in the last couple of years. And the pandemic was a shock no one anticipated that led to a massive disruption in supply chains. At the time on CNBC, every day we were talking about the backlog and the bottlenecks and how vessels weren't moving around quickly enough, et cetera, et cetera. You fast forward to today, give us a sense for how things are looking. How is the macro environment today versus, say, pre-pandemic, more normal times?
Right. Sorry about the small correction earlier.
No, please.
We are a private company, so maybe that's not why it's not so well known. We don't disclose any figures publicly. I don't get to spend any time every quarter speaking to analysts, so I get just to work and improve my business. But we are a company that's truly global. So we're truly in the economy. We are about 150,000 people providing shipping, transportation, and critical infrastructure around the world. I don't think there's a market that we are not in, and we have for sure had a bumpy ride in the sense that if I take you back to the COVID, we had basically a bust cycle where we saw global demand fall off a cliff in the second quarter of 2020 by about 20-25%. And I was not at MSC at that point in time. I was sitting home in my sofa waiting to transition from one company to MSC. But I remember very well thinking that I had to come and pick up the pieces, literally. But what happened was that COVID, the moment that China could start producing, and China was the key, because if China cannot produce, the world stops, or if Asia cannot produce, the world stops. But the moment that was possible again, the rest of the world that's consuming could easily sit as well at home ordering their stuff as going into a store, and we saw a from a bust to a boom period immediately in the second half of 2020, all the way through 21. And then here from more or less the summer, we're starting to see a more normalization. And I say this because what we could see was that, of course, all the money spent on services, whether it's going to a meal with your girlfriend, boyfriend, going to your favorite football team, going to the Bahamas or whatever people did, all this money got channeled into physical goods. And physical goods is what we live off and what we move. And at the same time, so much money was being put out into society that even today, savings rate are higher today than pre-COVID, even though they are coming down. So we saw an amazing roller coaster. But what I can say is that had it not been for the global supply chains, the global shipping, I think this lockdown would have been very difficult because we would have to sit at home, but we couldn't get the dopamine drive of ordering our next favorite pair of shoes. But this was at least possible thanks to the global supply chain. So we've seen this, but now just to really answer your question, now in the last, I would say since summer, we have started to see demand tapering off. Some people can say, ooh, that's very negative. I choose to see it a little bit more in the perspective of cycles, because if we compare it with 2021, yes, it's less, but 2021 was extraordinary. So we are seeing it normalize. And in fact, in the last few weeks, and we are a pretty good bellwether of what's going on, we are actually starting to see things come a little bit up again. So that's where I would say we are right now on the journey.
Okay, I have a couple of follow-ups I want to ask you, but I want to get to Thomas before I go back. Thomas, is it possible to create an economy that actually works for everybody? I mean, we sit on these panels and we talk about this ultimate goal, but capitalism by definition creates winners and losers, doesn't it?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think what is very important to understand is that life is at a tipping point. There is not an option to say we just don't do sustainability, for example. It is something where we need to go that direction. We need to have a future-proof economy. And that starts with, at Borealis, we say, we need to create a future positive environment. And this means we're starting with a strategy where sustainability is in the center of our strategy. And then, like every company, we need to have a strong foundation, which is the people, a strong commitment to safety, and then technology innovation. And with that, for Borealis, we then have two directions that we go. On one hand, growth. That is something, if you're in any business, growth is always an important part. And the second one is transformation. And this transformation part is the one where you will see a big difference for the different companies. It is a topic where some people say it's about, can you have the profitability? Yes, for sure. And can you do it during times when there are so many crises? Yes, for sure. I like very much what Ayrton Senna once said. He said, you cannot overtake 15 cars when it's when the sun is shining, but you can do it when there's rain. And so something like that will happen as well. It will be a big change in the economy. And I think what we need to do is we also need to consider that sustainability is, for example, in our case, a lot about circular economy. If we leave that out and we just continue with produce, use, dispose, we'll have a big problem, not only on the waste side, but also on the resources. So all that is building together a new setup that is needed for companies. At Borealis, we have a big transformation to circular in terms of we are using different technologies that we're partly developing by ourselves or developing with our partners. What we also see is that this is you need an ecosystem, and you have to do it in a different way than in the past. You cannot just sit at home and build everything on your own. You need to collaborate much more. You need to collaborate across the entire value chain, and technology and innovation will be a key differentiator. And I think it's very clear we will be later on, people will not look on what targets we had, they will look on what we have achieved. And therefore, there is no time to lose.
Absolutely. It also feels like we're at a time where, well, actually, the theme of this conference is assessing globalization. I was just going to say that many people are looking to assess where we are with globalization. Søren, I actually do want to come back to you on this point about supply chains, because I think you have a unique perspective on what's been going on there, especially in light of everything we talked about the last couple of years. Do you get the sense that countries are reevaluating their own supply chains? I mean, I can say that at CNBC, we've had plenty of people come on and say, well, because of what we saw happen throughout the course of the pandemic, we're rethinking our business model. We're trying to reduce lead times. We are trying to onshore, trying to get more things done locally rather than thousands of miles away. What do you see in that space?
Well, I think 2.5 years ago, not many people knew so much about the supply chain. And then, of course, they saw these pictures of a ship stuck in the Suez Canal, which everybody can relate to, and the stories around it that you, amongst others, gave. And then, of course, they saw the pictures of 100+ ships sitting off the coast of Los Angeles, Long Beach. And obviously, a lot of businesses suddenly saw that, well, without transport, I don't have a business, because we saw very much that for businesses, of course, it's the point of sale that matters, not whether you pay $1,000 or $10,000 in moving your goods. So that's really what we saw. Of course, I'm hearing about near sourcing and near shoring. I don't think it's as easy as it sounds, and I think it's going to be. I rather use the word a dispersed supply chain rather than a too focused supply chain. I think that's the reality we're going to see, because, or a distributed supply chain is maybe a better word, because a too focused supply chain, yes, you're very, very reliant on one or two sourcing areas into, maybe your main markets, but a distributed one is, of course, one way you reduce risk. But to just assume that you can near source, near shore, I think you're making some pretty big assumptions, because businesses need to be competitive. And we are going maybe into a period where, for most CEOs, cost is again going to come very high, and probably already is very high on the agenda. So competitiveness is important. We cannot assume that near shoring, near sourcing, gives the best products. Maybe there's a cost issue. We have inflation in the world, typically in the Western world. So minimum wages have gone up. So I think even the cost of production, forget about it. So I think a distributed supply chain is more realistic. One that's probably gonna, not be as much just in time, last minute, where people are willing to say, accumulate a bit more inventory to make sure they don't run out of stock. That's what I think we will see. And that, of course, means that over time, yes, maybe the reliance on specifically China will go down, but there'll be other countries in Asia, there'll be other countries in Europe, and maybe in a couple of decades, Africa will come on the scene and be a production area for the world. That's what we see.
Yeah,
I see lots of nodding heads.
Yeah, so if I may, we to us, and I absolutely agree, it's about a resilient supply chain. And as someone who has to deliver and distribute and manufacture globally, but our products, we do local. For us, it's all about finding that balance between just in time and just in case. And as a CEO, that's the challenge from an economic perspective and a cost perspective, because we didn't have the luxury of passing through the high freight costs. They happen so quickly and precipitously. We're a long cycle product. We don't have that luxury. So you really do have to know what problem you're solving for. Because I fear that with all the reshoring and home basing, if you're truly going to provide products and services in a global market, you need to make that decision. You need to find the right people, processes, and the right balance.
I think the approach that we are taking is one that's actually combining the ESG lens and the supply chain lens, and really talking about a decarbonized supply chain. Because if you want to build out, for example, the electric vehicle of the future, it's not going to make sense from a carbon perspective to have something mined in one place, processed in another place, utilize coal as your source of electricity to do it. And so as we are building out in Canada the end-to-end supply chain from mines to mobility, that's a key conversation that we're having with our partners about we are a place that you can export from to the world, but you can build your vehicle, for example, in a mechanism that is, carbon sensitive. And I think it goes back a little bit to, the conversation I think about being in law school and being in corporate law many years ago, and just thinking it doesn't make sense that the only thing you're thinking about is your shareholder. You got to think a bit more broadly. And so you have corporate leaders here who are thinking like that, but we have to recognize that has been an evolution to think about all these aspects. And that's really at the heart of what long-term thinking is about, what ESG is about. It's all a little bit about lifting your head up and saying, what's my impact on the planet? What's my impact on my neighborhood? And I have to care a bit more widely about who I'm doing business, how I'm doing business, and what the impact of my business is. And so, that's a big part of the conversation that we are having with businesses around the world.
Thomas, I don't know if you would like to add something on the topic of supply chains.
Yeah.
You do, then please.
Yeah. I think what we also have to take into account, many products are not produced in a very small factory. We have, for example, in our case, if we build a plant that's a multi-billion-dollar investment, and they are built where, for example, there is a feedstock advantage or a logistic advantage, so we cannot just decide, okay, it's more easy to build it here, and therefore we build it here. We have just built with Total Energies now a huge plant in the US because, of course, there's the feedstock advantage. And then, these are the limitations as well. When we talk about the logistics, that is something which is key as well. And also, when you decide where you build something, you have to look at where are your customers. What we do is, of course, for suppliers, we look more into the details. Are we dependent on one company, and is this company maybe just located in one country? That is a more difficult one. In the past, we had no problem to get primarily the energy from a country which was behind the Iron Curtain. And today it's totally different. We have learned that we need to look deeper into the supply chain and differentiate and make sure that we are not dependent on one country, on one company.
Well, I feel like I need to address the elephant in the room, and that's not the France-Argentina final. I'm Team Argentina, by the way, in a room of French people. No, the elephant in the room is Europe is facing an energy crisis right now, and we talk about the new direction that the global economy is headed in, but for many people, this is a winter of discontent. Many people don't know how they're going to pay their utility bills. Governments have had to take very tricky decisions. They've had to fire up coal plants again. It's been difficult all around, and that's going to continue for the next couple of months. Can you talk us through how your industry, the chemicals industry, has been impacted, and whether or not it's having a more long-term impact for your own vision for the company?
Yeah, so definitely this energy crisis, the prices in Europe do have a massive impact. And we see that some companies are talking about either shutting down units in Europe or at least rethinking their strategy for the European industry. Some people are talking about deindustrialization in Europe. And all that is a serious discussion that we have. We see that there is a significant disadvantage due to the energy price situation. On the other hand, several topics should not be stopped by that. We cannot stop, as I said earlier, the topic of sustainability. This is a topic of license to operate. And if you drive on a road and it's becoming icy, you also don't stop and wait until spring, right? So you adjust the way how you drive, you adjust the speed. You probably have to be more careful. You have to assess the risk better, but you keep going. And this is what we have to do here. In Borealis, we have the advantage that we have assets in the US, in Europe, Middle East. So we have quite a global footprint. And even more important, we are in many different industries. We are supplying the automotive industry, infrastructure, consumer products, healthcare, and many other areas. So I think it helps a lot to have a certain diversification to ensure that, we have polyethylene, polypropylene. Sounds like two products. In reality, we have more than 1,500 products because the specification and the use case is so different. But if you're in a very specific market, just in Europe, producing in Europe, being exposed to the energy price, that is definitely a very unhealthy place to be. That is reality. And I hope that there are good solutions for that this period is not lasting too long. And very important as well to give clarity what is planned, what can be done. Otherwise, companies will change their plans where to invest. Because if you're, especially when you're a stock listed company and you go to the supervisory board and you make a presentation about an investment case, that is very clear that you get challenges on that one.
Søren, do you have any perspective on how the energy crisis has impacted global trade?
Yeah, I mean, we can also see differences in the sense that Europe is certainly in a much tougher place, being so dependent on foreign energy and very foreign at this moment in time, and we see that by, first of all, the spike in growth post initial COVID was not nearly what it was in the US, and we are seeing now a much more subdued Europe in terms of demand. And we also, when we look in, I mean, we speak to all our customers. Borealis is a very good and strong customer with us. We speak with them, and more or less all of them are telling us that their forecasts to and from Europe are much more pessimistic than North America, US, Canada, Latin America, even Africa and Asia. So we see that I would say almost instantly.
The thing about this energy crisis is it's accelerating, you could say, more medium term, the drive to renewables and more sustainable sources of energy. Laurel, I want to put the question to you. What role can Canada play in helping economies with this transition? And I know that there are critical minerals that can also be
Absolutely. Canada can and will play a very significant role in the energy transformation. I think back to just last year when a German chancellor was in Canada, the conversation was about hydrogen and Canada moving quickly on hydrogen development projects, which have now begun to be a source of new fuels, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's other alternative fuels, whether it's traditional fuels that have more responsive to carbon neutrality through carbon capture and storage and various other things. So I think example of a country that is an energy rich nation, Canada is saying, listen, we can be part of the solution. We can be part of the solution for Europe, but we have to make some changes to the way that energy is going to be delivered. And that needs investment. And that is a huge part of what my team and I do every day. Travel around, talk to people, and land investments into Canada. Like, for example, Air Products, Umicore, LG, Stellantis in the last year to make some of those big transformations and respond to the need and be a good friend and neighbor to sharing the resource that we have, but getting it to those markets.
Judy, I'm going to ask this question to you again. You and I spoke about it earlier, but I think the broader room would also benefit from your response here. Why for you placing sustainability at the core of your business is so important?
Yeah, well, so if you think about just the usage that before I probably was on this platform, you didn't naturally think about elevators and escalators, even though you probably use them here today, you use them in your daily life. These are long enduring automation technologies that touch every facet of your life, whether it's your condominium, your hospital, your school, everywhere. And which means of the 20 million elevators in the world in use today, 7 million of them are over 20 years old, which means they have older technologies which draw more power, which are not as energy efficient, and which in certain parts of the world are driven by hydraulics, which are just not clean and not wise to use. So what we're seeing is actually quite a revival of the need to modernize. And I think what we all learned through COVID is beyond resiliency, we learned there was an opportunity when you're in a crisis to accelerate. And we accelerated digital initiatives, we accelerated product introductions because, as Thomas said, you can't wait for the spring. So I think that agility that we've all learned and is part of our muscle now is driving us towards more sustainable solutions. Buildings are significant contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, one of the largest single category emitters in the globe. So any of the building technologies that we are involved in or others are involved in that we can do to make things more sustainable without the need to construct, although construction, as we mentioned this morning, is still going strong even here in Europe. But even to modernize what we have will make our planet better.
Well, Thomas, you're the CEO of a plastics company. And I just wonder how you think about your business within the context of sustainability, because at the end of the day, we talk about plastics, and nowadays there's a big drive for recycling, the circular economy, et cetera, et cetera. How do you fit into that?
Yeah, this is one really important topic in our transformation journey. We have started some years ago with taking the recycling into our business model. We have been the first polyolefin producer to do that, and we are developing technology to improve those activities. And we have decided in our strategy that we will ramp up from 100,000 tons per year to 600,000 tons in 2025, which is tomorrow, and to 1.8 million in 2030. How can we do that? On one hand, as said, and this is one of the chances of Europe as well, we can develop technology here. And this is what we are doing. We're collaborating with some partners to introduce chemical recycling on big scale, to improve the mechanical recycling so that we are able to use this material not only for park benches, that we really keep the quality up and high. And by doing that and making that also interesting from an economical point of view, we can be sure that this will be also interesting for Asia, where the biggest part of plastic waste, for example, is an issue. We are also addressing that topic there. We have a project in Indonesia to deal with the problem of waste as such, because there is no one coming by and taking the garbage. It's just the river which is taking away the garbage. And this is definitely something what we have to change. We've started a project there for 2 million people to collect, sort, recycle materials. And we only will achieve a real impact if we make sure that those processes, those systems, those technologies are better than the ones we have today. As long as it is cheaper to throw the stuff into the river, it will happen, unfortunately. And of course, you can do a lot with policy. This is another big area. There needs to be more global policies, and there is one UN treaty on the way, which will help, because we need to make sure that when we talk about plastics, that we are aware of that this is an indispensable product for our modern life. We cannot have green power from the North Sea to South Germany without the cables, and the majority of the cable is not copper, yes, in terms of weight, but volumes, it is plastics. And we cannot have e-mobility without weight reduction, and this is done with plastic. So there are so many applications where we're not aware of. Sometimes we more think about the plastic bags and the problem that we see at the beach. We have to deal with that. We have to clean that as well. But this is a bigger topic.
Maybe I can jump in on the point of the importance of policy. You were asking about critical minerals. And so that's an example. I think where in Canada, a critical mineral strategy has been developed to be able to develop the domestic supply chain of critical minerals. It's part of a larger strategy of mines to mobility. And I think those are concrete examples where governments can have an impact in the things that they do. We all know that government regulates. We all know that government makes a lot of approvals. Government can continue to do those things, but do them in a way that can accelerate the development of a necessary ingredient that is needed to develop the future of our economy. And so I think that that's a key piece of the puzzle. I've been a regulator, I've been an activist, I've been a cabinet minister, and now I get to lead Canada's FDI agency. But it really stitches all those pieces together, because you need all the pieces of the puzzle to be able to drive that agenda in a comprehensive, thoughtful, forward-looking way.
Soren, I've got a question about shipping and global emissions, because there's a bit of a paradox here. So I was reading shipping accounts for 3% of global emissions. In 2021, saw an increase of emission of 5 percentage points. And so all of us will be like, okay, well, this is not good. It's not moving in the right direction. But then, many consumers are very happy to still buy the trainers that are made in Bangladesh and the sweater that was, sourced from India, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you square up consumer demand for low cost products with this desire to be more quote unquote ESG friendly?
Yeah, so like what my colleagues are saying here on the panel, I mean, for MSC, sustainability is also a top priority. And I would say, as a citizen of the world and somebody who wants to also bring something good for the future, including my own kids, I mean, we don't have a choice. It's a problem we have to solve, not maybe solve. And of course, then when I put that in context of my own business, clearly shipping is one of the hard to abate sectors. We account for 2-3% of global emissions. We move about 85% of the global trade, the world's goods. So we are the most efficient way, but we are still a hard to abate sector. And the problem that we have, or the challenge that we have, is the challenge is not the ship. We can build ships tomorrow that are green. We have engines that are tomorrow that can be green. The problem is the fuel availability. And the quantities here are so significant that people don't realize it, because even though we move 85%, there's still a lot of quantities involved. So our role in this, and if I just draw a parallel to what some of my colleagues are saying, is first of all, we are also advocating a more global regulation. We are advocating a level playing field. We are advocating a tax on a global carbon tax, so that we can, you could say, reduce the spread between the new fuels, which typically are 2, 3, even 4 times as expensive, and the fossil fuels, which are very efficient fuels. We have to say, we are advocating for a global R&D fund in shipping, where there's been thoughts up to contribute a fund of 5 billion. I've said several times, you can make it 15 billion for what I care. We need global R&D, because the problem is, this is not a problem that, MSC, even though we're a large company, we can tackle alone. We are not a fuel provider. We're not a fuel producer. We are a fuel consumer. We are putting a lot of energy into understanding this, but we should be working collaboratively along the supply chain to do that. And there are definitely customers out there, and the demand is increasing, who are saying, I'm willing to pay for. But sometimes, and this is where we have to be careful, sometimes when they then hear that the price is 3 times, 4 times, the reaction becomes a bit more subdued when they are standing in front of maybe more gloomy outlook that we are right now, contrary to the last 2 years, because I think most businesses in this world had pretty good times. Yes, not when you were in entertainment, travel, and leisure, for sure, but most other businesses went through COVID with better results, including shipping companies. But now they're looking at a more gloomy outlook, and they may not be willing to pay that much more. So we have to get regulation also to help us in a global playing field. And then just finally, one thing that I would like to say, and that is, we are not a fuel producer, we are a fuel consumer. I would have no problem if tomorrow regulators will tell me, Søren, as of 2030 or 2035, you can no longer build a ship that is driven by fossil fuels. Why am I saying it like this? I'm saying it like this because it gives me enough lead time, 8-10 years. But more importantly, it gives also the people who are in the energy business enough years to make the investment. It gives the banks, who are going to be the lenders, the time to do it. And it gives them line of sight saying, okay, after 2030, the shipping industry will only be producing these types of ships. And this is the type of regulation and policy, in my humble opinion, we need to instill.
So interesting. It does, at the end of the day, appear to be a cost issue. And we saw that in the renewable space. I'm not at all an expert in this topic, but we talk about how the pricing of renewables, solar energy, for example, so much more affordable today than it was, say, a decade ago. So hopefully that's going to move in the right direction. Thomas, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I would like to add to that. Sometimes when we talk about transformation, we think about the end stadium, which is good, but then we are saying, wow, we cannot afford that one. And for example, it's with fuels, but also with polyolefins. You can start and gradually increase. And you can say, okay, let's start with 5% that we are substituting. Also from the policies, we can say 20% needs to be recycled material until then. And with that, you make it more digestible. Sometimes there is then even not a real impact that you can see on the final product. So with that, ramping up, but not getting afraid when we see then at the moment the product is costing twice than the other one. But if you just add 5% in the first stage, it doesn't really matter. And with that, you get step by step everyone aware of what can be done. And then, of course, you need to find the best solution for the different areas. Is it the CO2 reduction? Is it the recycling that some brand owners want to put on their products? So there you can work, but I think first to create the awareness, there are possibilities, and which one do fit best to whom.
Judy, in your view, how should companies, businesses be held accountable for these decisions that they're making?
I think we should be held as accountable for that as we are for our financial figures. And I think we need to be transparent about it. And I hope we shed light on it. And, we have these discussions inside our company. And, one of the debates is, but what if we take a step back 1 year? What if it doesn't improve? I said, then we're still going to report it. And we're going to be transparent about it, and it'll motivate us to do better. So the challenge we have is there's so many reporting frameworks. I mean, we're a publicly traded company, that as we try to assess, we're filing just so many different frameworks. That our hope is this ISSO can get us to one consistent framework. I think we would all benefit from that. And I think we could benchmark from that, because right now, competitively, or as I'm talking to investors, they say, well, how's your competition doing? And I said, well, under which framework? And so it would be great to have that alignment. But I think we should all be held as accountable as we are for our financial figures, and it should be reported as appropriate.
Laurel first.
Sure. I was just going to highlight that. I think one of the things is that I know here in Paris, we're a long way away from Canada. But I think that there are partners around the world, and I want to try to pull us back up to the sense of I've been privileged in the last 11 weeks to be on the road for 8 of them across the country and around the world, and I do think that there is a desire, there is a bit of a sense of looking for some semblance of stability, semblance of where are we going, who can we partner with to tackle these huge issues that exist globally. What I would say is that we have been in Canada tackling these issues for a while. The industry has accepted this issue. They are investing. They are transforming. The government has set the framework. If I think about some of these topics, ESG, I brought that to the floor of the legislature 2009, 2005, first climate change plan. We've been on this road for a while, and I think that with the strong economic stability in Canada and what is transpiring, that we really do have the ability to be a source of the solutions, of the global solutions, connectivity, talent, the green energy, all of the things that are needed. So I think there is a positive path forward, and it will take really measuring what counts. From the earliest days as a minister, if you care about it, measure it. If you don't measure it, you won't know what's happening and you won't be able to tackle the issues. And I think that level of transparency has brought change in a variety of sectors and industries. And that's why it's so critically important here. And that broader perspective, externalities, looking at those costs and not saying that those are not our costs. They are our costs. We live and breathe that every day. I live on the edge of the ocean. We see the storms and we see what's happening. And that is impacting our planet in a way that when we first started talking about this a number of years ago, people hadn't seen what climate change was. There's no more excuses anymore. We can see it with our own eyes.
Yeah, there's not a stakeholder who isn't interested in this. As I look at every stakeholder community, whether it's our colleagues, whether it's the future talent we want to attract, whether it's the legacy we want to leave, whether it's our investors, there isn't a single stakeholder who doesn't believe doing the right thing is what we should all do. So we need to take it on. I think you're seeing a lot of responsible companies do that. We need to do that in partnership. We're not the ones to set policy. I believe the governments set the policy, but we need to adopt, adapt, and deliver.
I just wanted to compliment my colleagues with the two small points. First of all, it will have to be a transition. We will not go from 100% fossil based to zero in a heartbeat. And I wanted to compliment Thomas on this because we are seeing the same thing. As I said earlier, in our industry, and we consume a lot of fuel. The problem is the fuel availability. And we know, for instance, that LNG isn't the final solution. But the point is that going to LNG, you immediately reduce your CO2 emissions by 20%. So it's better than nothing. You immediately reduce the black carbons that sit on the ice caps and melt them. You more or less reduce NOx and SOx to zero. We have taken that decision because that's the responsible decision to do here now, even though we know it's not the final solution. But we also know that there's progress in the world. There are smart people out there who maybe develops the next level solution using biomethane. You liquefy that, you mix it with LNG. Suddenly you don't have minus 20% in CO2 emissions. You have minus 30, minus 40, and one day maybe a synthetic. So it's a transition, and we have to jump in. And that's also why it's very scary for me that if the only thing we do as big responsible companies is we say we will be carbon neutral in 2050. Well, first of all, people look at me and say, Soren, will you be the CEO in 2050? Maybe not, likely not. So it's much more important. Of course, we have to set the final targets, but it's much more important that we do near term, we take action now, and we get the regulatory framework to support that with some of the policy moves. Then I think we can move the needle fast, recognizing that it's not going to be in 10 years the world is decarbonized. Yeah. But we have to move now.
Yeah. The pragmatism is important there. I just want to ask, because we're nearing the end of the discussion, but maybe if I could start with you, Laurel, about what lessons are to be learned, you think, from the last couple of years that can help us shape the way we think about the future?
So I think there's lots of lessons to be learned. But one, we live in a globalized world. I was leading an economic development agency. We were watching what was transpiring on the other side of the world, and we were like, uh-oh, that's coming here. How do we deal with this? Right. So that aspect of living our daily lives, thinking that we are in our fantastic bubble in Canada was not true. We have a great bubble. But we're not a bubble. Right. We are connected. And then so that reality of the pandemic makes us really realize on climate change. We are interconnected. We are all breathing the same air, living on this singular planet. So I think that is key. The other one was, I think, a huge lesson for those of us who are closer in the government sphere. Government, we like to study things. We like to make sure everything's going to be perfect. Well, perfection is the enemy of the pragmatist who's going to move quickly. And the pandemic taught us to move quickly. With my team, we had launched online initiatives 2 weeks after the World Health Organization declared the pandemic and launched a full comprehensive program for digital adoption for companies that we worked with within 8 weeks. That is unheard of in terms of a time frame. So we should keep some of that with ourselves post-pandemic to be able to move at the speed of business. And I do see that lens now changing levels of government, but that there's speed, there's urgency, and we need to keep that urgency that we all have, that it is the time to move now. But I agree, we do not want to punish those who are making those initial steps, saying that's not the full step, but I'm starting. And so I think that also is a key component for consumers and citizens as well.
So I think the one thing we learned for those of us who are responsible for strategy and enterprise risk is you can never predict what's going to happen next. Not totally. And so the best you can do is control what you can control, prepare as best you can, and respond as quickly and in an agile manner as you can, and care about the people, but move forward. Inactivity and indecision is your enemy, and just stay true to your values, your company values, your personal values, which hopefully are the same, and make those decisions, be resilient, admit when you're wrong, but move forward. You will never be able to predict everything. We've learned that with a war in Europe. We've learned that with a global pandemic, supply chain, inflation we haven't seen, and all this in 2.5 years. Yeah. So the pace of change is happening quicker and quicker, and I think leaders need to be responsive quicker and quicker.
We continue with the lessons learned.
Lessons learned, yeah.
Okay. Well, I would say not to repeat what my colleagues have said. I would also say, first of all, probably one of the lessons I sit with is our industry was living a little bit in the darkness pre-pandemic, but suddenly people found out that there was a supply chain and there were people behind working very hard to do that. Maybe we got a little bit of undue attention then, or overdue attention, but for sure, we take it as a positive thing that actually people can see that there are a lot of men and women behind this moving the world's goods. Then I would also say, even today, sometimes I get confronted by globalization. Is it a good thing, bad thing? For me, I still believe the future economy is going to be a global economy, maybe more distributed one, as I said before. But it's very important to remember that global trade has, the last 50, 100 years, brought a lot of good. It has brought millions, hundreds of millions out of poverty. So it would be wrong to think that suddenly we're all going to, seclude ourselves from the world, because there are a lot of goods. Global trade has made it possible for the producers of the world, the consumers of the world, to have the marketplace. I often use a story, and I have so many stories over my career with local producers of fruit and vegetables in Africa. In the past, they could sell their product to the local market. Today, thanks to the global supply chain, they have the world at their feet, the world at their marketplace. And finally, when it comes to decarbonization, I also believe we're wrong to think that, well, as long as we just close ourselves around our borders, we'll solve the decarbonization problem because nobody's going to travel. No, it's not going to happen. And by the way, the best ideas are not always the local ideas. The best ideas are the ones that are forged globally in partnerships with other companies, with other industries, with other constituents. So I think to solve a lot of the problems going forward, we still need to have a global outlook, a global vision to things, and obviously we thrive on that as a business. So we have a vested interest, but I really do believe these things are true.
Thomas, the same question to you. What do you think the biggest lessons are from the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think we have learned that the complexity has increased significantly and the vulnerability has increased significantly by that. If we just think about, for example, a normal car has 150 million lines of codes today, and that is a different complexity than in the past, and a vulnerability that we're adding to that. And you can go on for social media, what that brought and the complexity, but the risks as well. And risk is always impact times probability. And we see that probability has changed as well. And therefore, one of the big learnings is we should not be too sure about the future and that we can predict that really. We need to be very agile to react to the actual situation. And also on the positive side, it is unbelievable what we have been able to deal with. If you just look back also in terms of digitalization, what happened over the last 2 years. So I think the real limitation is mainly in our heads. And if we just see what we are able to do when it's necessary, that should give us a quite positive note.
That's a very motivational way to end this panel. I love it. Thank you. Well, with that, it concludes our panel on charting the new economy. I think we touched on all different aspects, from supply chain to globalization to putting sustainability at the core of our businesses, and also what lessons we can learn from a very, very challenging couple of years. So thank you all very, very much.